it's crime. It is a financial crime to take these birds. And so for us to declare that they have no value, it's no financial value, and we don't, when we have insurance, we don't put any financial value on the things that we have for insurance. So, our cases have financial value, right? If there was a fire, the cases have financial value. But we do not place a value on the specimens themselves, and we do not estimate for people. Sometimes people want us to tell them how valuable X, Y, or Z thing is. We don't do that because we've declared that they have no financial value outside of their scientific value. And the idea that you would steal specimens from an institution, pull them apart, which is horrible enough, and then sell the pieces, that is just so immoral and so illegal that...
So do you guys know about this recent other situation at the British Museum?
Oh, at the British Museum? No.
No.
And there's an anthropologist. His name is Peter Higgs. If you Google that, that'll come up, and it's worth looking at because he was literally a curator. And it turns out that they had a massive collection of these little Roman era cameos. So little medallion type things that apparently are pretty valuable on the market. And what happened is one of the guys that was actually a buyer started seeing these things for sale and thought he recognized them from the British Museum collection.
Oh, no.
Oh, my gosh.
And so Higgs is now on trial for selling these things. He's
good.
Wow.
Good. That's crazy. So I talked to RJ about this. My sister used to work for a private map collector, and there's she has stories of that, where someone will go into the Harvard Library or the Yale Library or the Princeton Library, and they'll cut a map out of a book. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And it's that stuff, it is so interesting from to your point, Shannon, the true crime, but it's I can't believe that stuff is still going on. That's that Peter Higgs thing is a current thing. It blows me away.
I mean, when it came out, I was just
yeah.
That's human nature, right? The collecting aspects of human nature. It's the thing that makes us want to have a whole bunch of something. That's a good thing when you're trying to document science. But, it is part of human nature. It's why we have laws, right? Because people who do certain aspects of human nature, whether they think it's natural or not, need to be punished for those and pulled away from society so that they don't do it again. And we have a responsibility to make it harder for them to do things like that, fine. But we can't ignore that this is part of human nature. But, not everything people do is natural and good. Lots of what people do really sucks.
But I'll also say that at the risk of getting myself in big trouble is...
Uh-oh.
No, I mean, it's the fact that Higgs as a curator thought this
makes
was
it worse.
Somehow, well, what it tells you is that even the curators there don't care about the collections.
Right.
And that's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that. I can't conceive. I cannot. If I accidentally cut a tag off of something, I would feel so horrible that it would be one of those memories that never leaves you. I got up, I was preparing a jay in California when I was with Kevin Burns, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I got up and I went to go to the bathroom, and I came back and something had taken the bird I was preparing. And there were only little bits of it left, feathers or something. And I have nightmares about that particular thing. So I can't imagine doing something like that.
So if that's human nature, my problem is if as a society we lose sight of the value of these collections, then it becomes that much more justifiable in the mind of an individual to kind of say, hey.
That's why we always talk about why we have so many of them. not just one. It's not the same kind of representation. You just need one of each. We need to document change through time, and you need enough specimens of species to do that, to understand that. The only way to prevent mass disruption is to know what happened in the past so that we can use the data we have, the knowledge we have, to predict what might happen in the future and intervene before it's a worst case scenario. But you can't just stick your head in the sand and, if you're these carbon people who want to shoot things in the air to capture carbon without understanding the consequences of that for biodiversity, it's just, the earth, everything's integrated, right? The world works on networks. It doesn't work in hierarchies, even though, too many things do. It works in networks of connected individuals, connected geographic regions. Connections rule the world, and breaking certain connections, you can't always predict what the consequences will be. You can't assume. I would like to take mosquitoes out of the world. Well, that might be a bad thing for the world in general.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of insectivorous birds that would be in trouble.
Yeah, there's a lot of swallows that wouldn't be very happy if I did something like that.
Right.
So it's not just about you as an individual. It's not, you're part of a network, a connected network of everything that's ever lived on Earth. From its inception, from the beginning of the molecule of DNA and replicating cells up until the present, you are connected to everything that's ever lived on Earth. And that means, to me, you have a responsibility.
That was something that was driven into our heads from our earliest times in graduate school. And to take pride in becoming part of this sort of layer upon layer of historical work to build these collections.
Right.
Yeah, they're not stamps. And they're not books either, because books can be replicated. Current books can be, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't like the idea of thinking of museums like collections of books, because the four of us here are all different individuals, just like every individual that's in our collection's a different individual. They have their own story. They tell their own story. They tell part of the story of the species they belong to, but you can't replicate them. You can't get a really good photocopier and printing press and make more of them. They're unique aspects of biodiversity. And to me, that's, cutting a specimen up, taking the gorget off of a fruit crow. Who does something like that?
Well,
only people who don't understand their value, right?
So
their general value.
We destructively sample specimens now, but we do it where we're giving people or doing our own research using pieces of that specimen to get a genome, for instance, that'll tell you more about that individual, because that information is still harbored in that skin of that bird. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's an interesting one where sometimes the community is really like, you can't touch those specimens. And it's like, well, no, I think what we're doing here is augmenting the amount of information about that individual, as Shannon's saying, in a way that makes perfect sense to me that we would want to do. That's a completely different thing than just sort of saying that you could break off something for no reason at all.
And I belong to this All of Us Health initiative that that NIH is doing. They're collecting broadly. They've collected samples of people to look at their DNA with respect to diseases. And you need a diverse population of people in order to actually do things like that. And I want my DNA and an understanding of my genetics to help people not have so many autoimmune disorders. I want people to know that. I want what has happened to me to help into the future to protect people from some of the things. And the only way to do that is to have collections, whether those are, obviously there's huge responsibilities that go into collecting DNA of people because of the exploitation that can happen and has happened in the past with respect to that.
But, this is, so along those same lines, if somebody wanted to sample a few feathers of red-ruffed fruit crow, which for instance, was one of the target species that Edwin Wisp was going after. To understand the structure associated with geographic variation in that throat color, which exists, I'd view that as benefiting the specimens that those feathers came from. That's data that suddenly becomes in addition to what we know about those specimens.
And it's our responsibility to, as experts, people who have been trained and have long perspectives, to understand what is appropriate sampling. So it's our collective decision. No one person makes that decision in our institution. We talk about every request to use our specimens broadly about, where are the limits of what we're willing to do? What are we going to do? And that's a big responsibility, and we don't take that lightly. But you can't just view them as your own, right? They belong to society. They belong to the world, not to be exploited in that sense, but to have their stories told. And being too protective of them means that their stories can never be told. They can never sing out in the world again, because you've kept them behind lock and key and nobody can even look at them, let alone do anything else from them. That's not the answer, is not to be so isolationist and so protectionist about them. But you do have to, think about what you're getting from what people want to do from specimens. Yeah.
So what do you think about personal collections then, like Walter
illegal.
Rothschild's collections?
It's illegal.
So the interesting thing about Rothschild's collection is he got into financial trouble and ended up having to sell it. So this is true. And it ended up going to the American Museum of Natural History.
Oh,
280,000 specimens for $300,000 or something like that.
Wow.
So
he was blackmailed, right?
He comes from that wealthy family, but he was like the.
But the big thing is those specimens are still there, and they're still there for people to study, and they're
and mores change, right? The things you're willing to do change. We would not purchase specimens in that same way today. But we have taken. Actually, that's not true. Actually,
no.
We have taken a lot of orphaned collections into our institution because they could be sold and taken off of a market so that they're not available to science. So there are times. Birds are different from other things too. There are things that you can't do with birds that really are illegal, but it's not illegal for insect collections, for example. And they have been purchased.
But at the time, I mean, were there different standards? Do you think like what Walter Rothschild was doing?
That was normal back then.
That was normal then.
Although it was extreme, right? He had more than anybody else that could even conceive of. But
and they were well maintained, right? It's not like he was destroying these or anything, or they're still used today, right?
For sure. And again, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, it's a perfect example of what's the term I want to come up with? Basically, the British Empire going out and exploiting biodiversity around the planet. And the only thing I chafe about that aspect of it is that those specimens are still there and they're still actively being used. And they're actively being made accessible in most cases to people everywhere for the science. And it's not an argument I'm going to win particularly, but at the same time, I mean, we have examples of that. We have at the Field Museum, one of the bases of the original part of the collection is the Conover game bird collection, which was this guy, H.B. Conover, loved game birds and made arrangements to get as many specimens of as many species of pheasants and gallinaceous birds as he could from all over the world. And because of that, it's an incredible data set from the early 1900s of the distribution of pheasants down to the level of geographic variation in populations. That's still really valuable today. And that's entirely computerized and put up online so that people can access those data and use them. And I mean, we get queries about that collection and other holdings from Indian scientists today that are working on modern stuff and wondering about various distribution questions that come up because of birds in that collection. And we can provide them with the information that we have for those specimens, which may help explain, the kinds of things that Shannon's been talking about associated with changes in distribution or, just changes in populations, identity and across geography. And all that stuff becomes really important as we go forward and look at ourselves as stewards of biodiversity across the planet.
I mean, this is a legacy, right, of curators, is the care they give the collections, the things that get put into it while they're kind of in charge of it. And that I know with 100% of my being that is what lasts from what John and I have done here. That is the lasting thing. It's not publications, which are fun and cool, but I know with every fiber of my being that the specimens will be at the basis of every bit of research that comes afterward. And that's why it's such a violation of a sacred trust for someone to come into it's like coming into your house and stealing things. But in which case, if it's a piece of jewelry, okay, well, whatever, I can probably get some more gold and I could have someone recreate it. But that can't happen if you take an actual individual. You're going to let someone take one of the set of identical twins because, hey, you have another one. It's not like that. And that's how I feel about people coming in and stealing things from the collections. Reprehensible. Yeah. And he should financially have to pay. So say you're not going to send him to jail. Okay, well, then you're going to work for the rest of your life to make sure museums have enough money to take care of their collections. That's what you're going to do.
So there, as I understand it, there was a fine associated with his conviction.
Yeah, what was it, $10,000 or something like that?
I was trying.
I don't remember. We can ask Kirk when he comes. I don't know, but maybe I just don't remember. Yeah, certainly not enough.
It's so weird to think that he's just like out on the streets somewhere.
Right.
Like, I don't know. That's so weird.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's worth looking at the Yale presentation that's on YouTube.
Okay.
In that sense, just because Kirk talks about being several years into the project and actually getting in touch with him and doing an interview with him, and some of the things he says, and yeah,
he has no remorse. He still doesn't understand what he did, right? So that makes me hate him even more. Because you can do bad things when you don't know, and you can atone, but there's no atonement. I mean, I believe that people should atone, and I believe in redemption in that sense. I believe that people have the ability to change with new knowledge and with maturity, but that seems to have eluded this person. He doesn't want to be called a thief, for example. Well, what do you want to be called then? That's the nicest thing I could. That's the nicest thing I could call you. I have a lot of worse words I could use for you. But anyway.
Well, so I guess getting back, so we talked a little bit about Walter Rothschild, but so basically, I don't know, the way Kirk kind of laid it out is he did all of Walter Rothschild's history of his museum, I guess, that he had built and then ended up selling off a lot of it because he was blackmailed. But then got into this feather fever topic, which we touched a little bit on the last one. But, I'd always heard about, how so many birds were killed off for women's fashion, but Kirk did like an amazing job, like breaking it all down. Yeah. Like there were so many just like staggering. I mean, he talked about hundreds of millions of birds were killed for women's fashion. They call it the age of extermination.
I think one of the reasons why this book resonates with people is because if you look at the history of Vogue magazine and, Ladies' Home Journal, they're all intimately tied in with this feather fever.
There was a ornithologist walking through, this was in 1886, walking through uptown New York and counted 700 ladies wearing hats with birds and 3/4 of them sporting whole skins. Like, it's just blows my mind to think about that you could walk around and see all that.
So the person who did that was Frank M. Chapman, who was curator of birds at the American Museum of Natural History. And he was the one who started writing about that largely set a lot of that in motion. And
did he started the Christmas bird count too? Did we talk about him? Or
so
maybe not.
I think that is right. I get him confused with Ludlow Griscom sometimes. But I think he did actually start that.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. Those are. I said this before, that I like that Kirk brought it up, because I've been in situations where I've been in collections and pulled open a drawer in, I think it was at Amherst College in Massachusetts, and there were 20 or 30 ruby topaz hummingbirds, which is a species that's endemic to the Cerrado of central South America. These beautiful gold-throated birds with red caps, and there were 30 males with literally no data that had been collected for the millinery trade. And part of me likes to think that it's kind of scary how much was collected that way. Pretty much all of these species have actually continued to exist and done fine or recovered.
What do you mean?
But it's
there's a cumulative effect of
well,
not just the collecting, but of the environmental habitat destruction that's happened.
Well, that's a whole different thing, right?
But they don't necessarily separate from each other. Is that if you collect something because you think it's abundant, well, look at passenger pigeons. They didn't ever think they were going to have to stop collecting them. It was the most numerous bird in the world, people thought.
Well, they weren't collecting them. They were killing them for food and.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. No, I mean we're stewards of the biodiversity of this planet, and so that Frank M. Chapman example is something where he essentially. I mean, I don't know whether you could call it an epiphany in the sense that, but he was definitely concerned enough that he made a point of pointing out what he was seeing on the streets of New York in a way that made
people, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to go back to your old ways when someone's put a mirror right up to your face and you take a look and you don't like what you see. When that kind of moral judgment is put on things, aren't you obliged to change at that point?
Yeah, it was so cool to see like this. It's swinging back the other way, because as you're reading all about feather fever, I was like in this this gloom and doom, and then we talk about the start of the Audubon Society, people like really recognizing like this needs to stop, and it being like led by women too was so like fascinating, and was like, I don't know, felt really good. Yeah. So I loved him following up with that was like a really good like feel good to the end of it. So
yeah, he was. In the interview at Yale, he's very quick to point out that most of the birds were being collected by men, so that they could be sold. So the profits were actually So there was profiteering involved.
Yeah, for sure.
There was a quote in the book. I love this, like the irony. He said, "In one of the stranger intersections of animal and man, the feathers of brightly colored male birds, which had evolved to attract the attention of drab females, were poached so that women could attract men and demonstrate their perch in society." It's like the irony there. And like, I love the way that he points that out and weaves that together.
Yeah.
God, humans can be so strange.
Yeah.
And with respect to the book, again, and when I've heard Kirk talk about this, I mean, he sees himself, in my opinion, with good justification, a little like Frank M. Chapman saying, hey, look, if this can happen and could happen again, what does that say about our care of the collections that are spread across the entire world? I mean, the
reality is that people treat people this way too, right? As expendable, disposable, unimportant.
Some people like animals more than people, though, so hopefully this story resonates enough to make a difference. I hate to say.
See, I buy into that.
One of the things, Amanda, we were talking a little bit before we hopped on just about how like it was kind of the like women empowerment in fashion. Like it wasn't just necessarily looking out for birds, but also women being like, my fashion doesn't matter as much, which was kind of an interesting like
I don't
twist
want
on it.
I don't need to be a human with my waist that small.
Yeah.
And that was before women could vote, right? So the only political power they had was either influencing men or through these movements like the Audubon Society. This is how they exercise their voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, remember, in my lifetime is only when women could have a credit card or own property on their own. This is not, I mean, we're not talking 200 or 300 years ago. We're talking about 50 years ago. And even though we seem to be taking steps backwards in terms of the control that women have over their own lives and their own bodies, but you know, that's what happens when you challenge the patriarchy. It bites back.
Yeah, I liked, I wish I had written down her name, but one of the first people Kirk talked about was a woman who wrote a piece for a magazine, and she said we're following fashion from like French high-end prostitutes. Like this shouldn't be like our like end in life. Like women can be more than just like objects to be observed, and like we can cultivate our inner world and our, you know, greater value. And I thought I really was interested in that because I didn't realize, I guess I was aware of the beginnings of the Audubon Society, but I didn't realize how much this had an influence on, you know, I guess feminism and women's rights in general. I thought that was so interesting.
You know, which has direct lines into things like Silent Spring and Rachel Carson eventually writing about chemicals in the environment. And you know, again, Shannon said this, it takes a village, and villages have two sexes in them.
Or if they want to persist, they do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not so many parthenogenic humans.
And they wouldn't be male.
Nope, they would not.
I thought this was like a throwaway, or I shouldn't say a throwaway sentence. I doubt Kirk would say that, but something people might have breezed through, but also talked about how it was harder to wear birds as cars were getting smaller and movie theaters because they were blocking people.
That cracked me up.
Yeah. So thanks to feminism, environmentalism, and like smaller quarters.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, our son plays hockey in 3 minutes, so.
Okay. Awesome. Right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about before we wrap it up on this one then?
So the one thing I want to bring up is one of the lines that I meant to go back and try to see if I could find it in the book to make sure it was there, that I always think about is that very late in the book, he has an interview with one of the fish fly tyers, and the fish fly tyer says, well, they weren't using them, so we did.
Oh.
And that to me is a line that I tell people about when the book comes up, because the whole thing that we've been talking about over the last 2 episodes is that these are used. These are incredibly important points, as Shannon said. They're individuals, and they're not replicable in a simple way like other things can be. And so that line's always struck with me because, you know, as you pointed out, I think at one point, RJ, Kirk has said, yeah, you'd be surprised how vibrant this community of fish fly tyers is right now, still today. And
yeah,
you know, this gets back to what we were just talking about with the hats. If you could just convince them that you can put feathers in hats, because you can get feathers lots of places. Feathers can come from places that are entirely reproducible and sustainable. And the idea that you would even think about a non-sustainable aspect of going into a museum collection is just
only people with
crazy.
Extreme privilege think and do things like that, right? It's not people out of desperation that are doing that. Those fisher people are not desperate. They have privilege to be able to do that, to express their art that way. It's not desperately poor people. Desperately poor people kind of honor their environments because they need it so desperately to exist. I mean,
but it's a crazy story with I think a lot of implications for what humans are potentially like and what they're capable of. And hopefully some of those things come out on the positive side down the road.
Well, they produce people like Kirk Johnson who tell the story in a way that makes a difference in the world.
True.
Nothing's ever all good or all bad, except stealing specimens from museums. That is always bad.
It's all bad.
It's all bad.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this week. Next week we'll be back with some more Feather Thief. Kirk ended the chapter. He always kind of tease up like the next chapter at the end of that one. So this last one that we just read kind of ended with like the birth of wildlife trafficking. So I'm sure that's gonna lead to a lot of discussion. That's gonna be kind of crazy. So we'll talk about that next week
for sure. And we definitely should. Yeah. It's a serious topic.